Hi, welcome. I'm Charlie Legere. I'm one of the co-curators of the Holloway series along with Lynn Haginian. I'd like to welcome you all tonight. I'm going to make a couple announcements and talk about the order of the readers tonight, and then I'll give way. The announcements are as follows, which is that next week, on Thursday, the poet Robin Blazer at noon is going to be reading in the Lunch Poem series. Robin Blazer was, along with Kenneth Rexroth and Jack Spicer and Robert Duncan, one of the legendary poets of the San Francisco and Berkeley Renaissances. And he has two books of poetry, well, two collected works published recently. One is a book of collected poems called The Holy Forest, and his collected essays are called The Fire. That's next Thursday at noon. And then our next Holloway reading, the last one of the semester, is the week after that. And it's on Wednesday the 12th, and it's Caroline Bergvall, who's an artist who does work with text and sound. For example, on Ubu Web, you can listen to her poems, or also you could read them in a downloadable PDF of a book that she did as a collaboration with a graphic designer. And that's on Wednesday the 12th at 6:30, a couple weeks from now. I also want to point out a couple things. One is that we have the ASUC bookstore here selling David Marriott's books. You can take a look at that afterwards. Introduce yourself to Will, who's selling books, and also thank you, Will, for doing that. I'm sorry, it's not the ASUC bookstore, it's the Cal student store. And then the other is that these events are videoed and put up on YouTube. And so if you've missed past events, or if you want to look at this event again, you can go to YouTube and just type in DS Marriott or the date or Holloway series, and it'll bring it up. Kind of a cool feature. The order that we had originally was that a graduate student named Katrina Dodson in the comparative literature department, and I'll say her name so that she has some presence in the room. She was going to introduce Adam Ahmed, who is the graduate student poet who'll be reading before David Marriott, but I guess she's stuck in traffic. So I am lucky to have her text here, so I'm going to introduce Adam Ahmed. And then after I do that, Nilüfer Gardezi is going to introduce David, and then David's our featured guest. So, all right. I am pleased to introduce you to Adam Ahmed. Adam is a first-year PhD student in the English department here at Berkeley with a particular interest in British Romanticism. Last spring, he completed a collection of poetry entitled The Virgin Parchment as his BFA thesis at Emerson College in Boston. You can read his poetry on his blog, The Twittering Machine, at Adam Ahmed, which is ahmed.blogspot.com. As a teenager in Burlington, Massachusetts, Adam first began writing poetry in the form of gangster rap lyrics. He further honed his craft through engaging in, not freestyle, but key-style, battles in online rap forums. His initial interest in hip-hop and spoken word led naturally from NWA to Emily Dickinson and Sylvia Plath. There are no references to Eazy-E, Talib Kweli, or Nas in these poems. I probably just mispronounced one of those. Nor to Joy Division or the Smiths, though these pieces do bear Adam's strong sense of musicality. Rather, the names dropped here turn towards the mythic and erudite. Eurydice, Athena, Lot's wife, Mahler, Baudelaire, and the painter Oskar Kokoschka. I probably mispronounced one of those, too. He worried at times that his poetry might seem too archaic or formal, and while his poems often seem as though they could be written in another, more serious century, they also veer into sudden patches of dark humor or turns of present-day vernacular. The son of Egyptian parents, Adam also cites his Islamic upbringing and familiarity with the Quran as unconsciously informing his poetry, with its lyrical passages that can move from praise to damnation in a single moment. Adam's poetry practices a certain lyric containment. His pieces are short, their language minimal, their imagery cast in bold primary colors. Yet they overflow with intensity, like Anselm Kiefer's cosmic panoramas. They push on you with their stark violence and push on you with their visceral rhythms. Like the poetry of Paul Celan and Cesar Vallejo, these poems are painfully beautiful, seductive and forbidding, penetrating, bloody, and frozen. They compulsively reiterate the same word images until these begin to form their own particular universe of meaning. They choke on shards of language and broken bones and evoke the voices of song, but voices that come to us as though from far away, straining through glass or stone, as in the poem Apostrophe, which begins, "From a mutually ruined city you call to me, ashes to ashes, in an aria exceedingly alarming." These poems are often dark and disturbing, yet at the same time they preserve a sense of tenderness and hope. Please welcome Adam Ahmed.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. Sorry I had to change things up a bit there, but the poems are fairly short. They're under a minute long each, so I probably won't be up here for more than 9 minutes or so. Can you all hear me all right? Okay. The first poem is called Seishura. Your body did not stagger in that determined lunge for the water, but fell, seamlessly, it seems, fond of the waves that parted us and moved you into the museum's walls, where your face remained, consolatory as an anchor, frozen in those first pangs of asphyxiation, encased beneath the breathless glass and the curator's prohibition. Your ancient face was never tangible, but seemed instead a mirror for my own imbecile despair. To fabricate your history, to forge the punctures for you, to breathe, here among the looming portraits of explorers, twin sibling and lover with whom I drown. Next poem is called Game Face. A and B enter a room, or A enters with B in the back of his mind, or B enters A with the persistence of someone entering a room. A and B enter a room as one, two bodies inhabiting a face, ignorant of the law that stipulates only one can escape, a test between backward soul and starving body, founded in a butcher's dream that there lies a body composed of extremities, to take the knife up against oneself or exit a savior with one eye open. The house. In the break, there was the beginning. In the beginning, there was the leak. The sweat and blood that built a house that would always break. For it had been built by a being that bled, a carpenter who carved his own mistake in the wooden frame, to reassure a place for his own hand at the other stake. Little hand made of wood, you are no more his own than in a dream. The father and the tyke scratched the itch with the same hand, not one holding the other, but one asleep and the other woke. Next poem is called Apostrophe. It's kind of a Dear Reader poem. There's also a dedication for M.H. Apostrophe. From a mutually ruined city, you call to me, ashes to ashes, in an aria exceedingly alarming. Reader, we have fallen into one another as watchmen, each unto his tower bonded by a fascination with the other's fire. You are not you exactly, but what we look out on together, over and over again, until what we see inspires the same breath split between us, not quite at home with ourselves in our disparate desperations. Catharsis. Once he did put his hand against your image, no longer the liquid that once weighed himself, but a self-evidence accumulating fingerprints, where it was written that each page unread would steep its owner's weight in water. Little half-drowned thing, without enlightenment, you will not know the pleasure of having been weighed entirely. This next poem is called Allegory. You've probably noticed a pattern in my titles by now. What you need to know about this poem is Amherst is a city in western Massachusetts, and it's also the hometown of Emily Dickinson. Allegory. A long time you have been making the trip from Boston to Amherst, turning over sad thoughts in the snow, embodying that trope of winter, the perverted figure of the traveler traveled too far deep in virgin snow, nameless example of a fervor that urges only to disappear. Yet you would put your blood-filled shoes behind glass if it meant such allegory, would easily swallow the sculpture cement to harden as a callus. This poem is called Colors for George Trakl. George Trakl was an Austrian poet who wrote in the early 1900s, and during the start of World War I, he's often associated with the German expressionist movement of the time. What intrigues me about him and what led me to write this poem is his strange use of color and the pastoral form. And like me, he seems to be writing the same poem over and over again. Colors for George Trakl. To know the moment as blue and not as red is to see it for the first time as it has always been, in inches bestowed through snow, how it enters white and turns to blue when you remember it, a kind of sleepy process, digging the sheep that you've forgotten out of the snow. Shepherd alone with the shovel in the storm, what white bulk becoming blue do you turn over remembering your sister's wrists? What path do you dig that is not already filled again? This is the last poem I'm going to read. It's called The Realist, and you're all welcome to laugh. The Realist. He did not know the difference between good pain and bad pain. Quote, pain for me has always been a kind of memory game. To prick my fingers through the strings of a guitar was a torture, each fresh ache tinged with a little death, unquote. It was always something with him, a sprained finger, a sore penis, a pulled ego. I told him, where I come from, you could lose your ear by day and muster enough strength later to paint yourself in the moonlight. Well, he started to believe if only he lived in portraits, his disease would be cured. And here we are today, a real pair of numbskulls, his song and his scream inseparable, as he bemoans a new pain in each plucked string. And me, depicting him for over a decade now, trying to reconcile the pain of his song with the pain of knowing him. Thank you.
Good evening. The estimable James Baldwin writes in his novel, Giovanni's Room, "It takes strength to remember. It takes another kind of strength to forget. It takes a hero to do both. People who remember court madness through pain, the pain of the perpetually recurring death of their innocence. People who forget court another kind of madness, the madness of the denial of pain and the hatred of innocence. And the world is mostly divided between madmen who remember and madmen who forget. Heroes are rare." I was brought back to these indelible words while reading DS Marriott's first collection of poems, Incognegro, published in 2006. To read this meditative volume, I feel, is to wonder over the limits of our own beleaguered heroism, our own attempts at heroic acts of reading. Marriott here confronts us with the specters of the Middle Passage and slavery. In reckoning with this haunting history of manifold loss and death, we are, like Baldwin wrote, by turns compelled by the necessities of remembering and the necessities of forgetting. How can we bear to remember? Yet too, for me, as I hope it might be for you, how can we bear to forget? And what happens when the memory is a shared historical one that has been so long-standing and deeply experienced, inherited so as to be unconscious, subterranean, and beyond our normal day-to-day surface understanding. Incognegro recovers this bloody, fetid history, marks it, and makes it apparent by re-engaging with and reworking memory. Marriott skillfully navigates the maddening line set by Baldwin and takes us as his readers with him. Our poet writes with an unfolding thoughtfulness and quiet deliberation. For instance, in a poem early on in his collection, The Steerage, he writes, "I do not see the sense of rare privilege, putting heroism into words of arbitrary redoubt. When we go forward so slowly, walking alone and in the dark, circumspect lest we fall." These lines reveal a sensitivity to and keen awareness of the road being trod in verse, the course of our speculation and imaginings, and our status as freighted figures in transit. Marriott humbles the act and us from the start, should we be fooled in exalting ourselves and lightening the load. We pause and ask then, how might we turn to and know this looming history of death and these ghosts of our past? It is an enormous and complicated journey, and because of this, Marriott uses the subtle, natural motions and interconnections of the poetic sequence to limn the terrain before us. We go forward, yes, but not so slowly, not alone, and no longer in the dark. Indeed, such an awareness and sense of the needful interconnection grows, and the poet begins the going tides, the following poem in the sequence, with a now gathering and emboldened we that traverses, he writes, "Through the waters of the knowing world, remembering the sum of your dying and all my surer years." The next poem and the last one of the sequence, the dream called Lubeck, is ever diligent about the reworking of memory and the historical understanding that is its outcome. The poet writes, "To be myself inside the witness, where memory falls in remembrance," and later and again, redoubling his efforts, "To be myself inside the witness, witnessing the lost one never coming back." Here Marriott is seemingly worrying the line, as with blues music, breaking up the initial phrase, twisting it, changing the pitch, repeating words and their slight alterations to emphasize and clarify this willful, very willed moment. Our appreciation expands. We know that the reckoning is too great, the cost of witness to self and other is enormous, but the challenge to history and memory is yet there and pressing. It is the knowledge that, quote, "the sacred cannot be housed here after the silences of so many years, after the weaknesses of our disunity. We return to what is lived in the barrenness of what is desecrated, for tragedy is never enough." The recognition of our collective responsibilities and failings articulated in these lines is at once terrifying and enlivening, and it is characteristic of Marriott's unrelenting poetics. We are left to wonder again, and this time with renewed and exact attention. What do we do with memories that do not safely and benignly sit in the past, that refuse to be patly housed? Where do we, who have been weak and silent for so long, go from here? What measure of madness will we choose? Such vital questions are a part of Marriott's broader work as both scholar and poet. As a faculty member of the History of Consciousness program at the University of California, Santa Cruz, his interests span to include Black cultural theory and philosophies of race, the literary and visual cultures of modernism, literary theory, and psychoanalysis. DS Marriott has written 2 works of cultural studies criticism, On Black Men, published in 2000, and Haunted Life, published in 2007, as well as 2 poetry collections, Incognegro in 2006, and Hoodoo Voodoo, published just this year, excuse me. He's here tonight to share his poetry, and we're very pleased to have him join us this evening as a part of the Holloway series. Please join me in warmly welcoming DS Marriott.
Wow, what an introduction. A perfect example of unfolding thoughtfulness. Thank you for that, and thank you, Charlie and Lynn for allowing me to come and read to you. And thank you all for coming out. Yeah, I hope the reading isn't going to be as somber, perhaps, as previous works indicate. But I wanted to read new work because of which is dedicated to two poets who unfortunately died last year. The Black Martinican poet, Aimé Césaire, who was a big influence, and also a very dear friend of mine, the English poet Andrew Crozier. So what I'm going to do is read from this new book, or new manuscript, called Little Egypt. And it basically has these two poets as their foci. The Book of Drowned Slaves. The sea reeks of them, and yet, see, it refuses to hold where the sky burns supreme with fire. Far out it bulks to names, nouns, sounds surfacing in the foam far lovelier than in the throat. Halls on a trot line, jewels of thyme and vinegar. There's a resurrection, tender, subdued, without a name or asylum. A bottle tossed in disfiguration among waders and wild birds, echoing the sun. The diminished voices sinking like crystals, the black figures resting on a vacuum, the eye of water a chasm reflecting nothing. To be thrown for us is to accept that we are uttered sworn, blown like wraiths into an imaginary boat, merging in the surrounding substance. But for slaves who will not be remembered nor praised, who will strew words and wreaths of longing on pedestals, stolen brushstrokes, except in the small accidents of history? What matters is the way out, the irreversible serenity of the sea, the sinister, denuded shadows of what is blinding. Wistfully, it rains on the sea. Light shears and blurs and chords the onshoring. Darkness resumes in inconsequential imitations, but we will never know the pleading fires, nor feel the heft, the wound of a living convulsive movement inhabiting the air as a less crazed leap into a suspended present on drenched, rustling wings. Flights into the night of the world when we swim out of sync and consider the whitest typhoon echoing. The skies are irrevocable, overcast, blare with the increase. I shall raise my beak and my mask, my mouth a mirror to lightning, and for these islands I will remain the tattered whisperer of kings. And even if in irony the void is a sea in crimson flames, and the glaze turns blue with the indignation, what will not turn blue is this loss beyond telling, the taste of basalt and feldspar rank in the spumage. The waves cue to take the last breath, but fail to drown what could never be taken away. The shifting seams of memory white thermoclines on breaking seas, the billowing nets heavy with dreams dissolving. Wild birds rise replete from the starved leas, and where they lapse, drift, mirrors copy them, leashed to fires of oblivion. The Book of Storms. It's his time. Imagine the surprise of a musket popping for one brief moment only. Imagine the sound gathering secretly, then approaching the disbelieving eye with the roar of its impact. The sound, measured like a betrayal of trust, opens a hole in existence. Blood glows livid like a bruise on a cheek. In the spectacle of grief displayed, the woman who dances does not dance, but scribally veers across the boards like evening leering above the pens. Shining ever heavier in the morning surf, the mast mirroring the waters of unfamiliar lands. Nigger again. Postcard 4. Sin is infinite when the waves are lean, and this is called Ruskin's Fantasy. It begins with a quote from Ruskin. My art is all on eyes of fish now. Its slavery now is colder. He's commenting on a painting by Turner. detailing slaves being thrown overboard. Excuse me. Like a fire shuddering out of a cold darkness only to vanish again, Ruskin's desire is scarred by the iciness of what it devours. The sun is lowered now, the day ordered, neither incult nor schist as he points to the bowl overflowing. The pressure of the moment is a weight on a trawl line, a marker rolling in the flux, watching the girl sit motionless on the bed, her skin like crusted waves of snow, her lips straw red like the crushed strawberries she holds in her fingers, her bare thighs gaping. White she is given to him like daylight, her limbs glow luminous like a weirstone. This is not a metaphor. There is a world inside each form, daughters of invention whom every Alice knows. Fishes everywhere like black graves from every direction, biting and tugging and dragging him down into the chill black fume. A shark's eye scours the steep abyssal slopes below formless green moonlit waves. The dangling salt-eaten figures stiff-weighted, forlorn, are mermaids overwhelmed in the troughs. Time is stratified, shaped by pinpoint on the cast, aching to avoid where beauty beats to a keel of truss. He sits watching her lips darken, inner mouthing the 5 rings of terra nullius. It's his time. Pescott 5, Carcere Juro. Tradition. Not iron blending in with salt, and not jars of rum, not rhetoric, the pure enchainment of naked images, nor certainly the institutions that display it, smeared with galley soot or grease, nor stillness, freed from being there, the typhoon, but the commemorative essence of what is absent, swimming in green contradiction, the mirage, a radiance do I see. As a ship lists guiltily amid a landscape of parentheses, the 2 great ridges burled without issue in presencing, time conceals the real movement of history. The eye that bites, forever waiting on the exigency, is the black hulks, closing in on them like swarms. Fate, the fine-drawn urinal of the artist, inu inter alia like the isolating instability of perfect resemblance. Dumped halls twisting and bunching like pages in a sublime wind, arras for morality tale, aureoles for mercurial opera, pigments for memorial without being nor flesh. This is the second poem in this new book, and it's called The Coffle. Dear Notebook, a beginning we but barely endured. In the grey of dawn, the singer lay down in his change, benumbed by fever. The rain was coming down in torrents and washed over him, flowing down his face, gathering in rivulets and streams on his nakedness. The night before, he had sat far off, watching the children warming themselves at the bivouac fires, so utterly exhausted he was unable to move as the night set in and the darkness in the forest slowly started to hum, dissembling its encroachment. We walked through heat and dust, nearly mad with hunger, and at night we shivered with the cold. The journey upriver took forever, a thing not to be forgotten. The songs he sang during the entire journey, the submerged pain in his voice heard reverberating as we forded the river, and the winds waylaid the scows, the meaningless sounds of his language mesmerizing like music and perpetual like an echo. We could only imagine the history and stories they were telling, stories of loss and danger, of homelands and dear departed ones, of the yearning life to come. The day before he died, they took him away into the forest and did all sorts of things to him before they severed his tongue. The sun had not yet risen from behind the mountains when he laid himself down in the clearing. He looked towards the heavens with irreversible sadness and then opened his mouth. The sounds that came out were unbearable, but were soon muffled by the rain, by the shouts and blows. Not once did he raise his head or close his mouth. Music deluged forth in the midst of the body's ruin as he bled away into nothingness. Then all the sounds disappeared, the rain stopped abruptly and plunged everything into silence. As we enter the markets, the singer's shadow walks beside us still. Caesura now determines the being of the world. At the water's edge, we must let the chains slacken and implore our abject feet and arraign the dark curtains of leaves, cold with the stammering where the earth's inhibition allows us to rest. Mounted between dreams, the swirl of eyes, ceaselessly awaiting the sound of hooves and the guns, always more than the singer's baleful scent where we sit faceless, mute in our instrumentality. The echo spreads in empty bellies. As in the first scattering, the moon and the rocks are without meaning, the gods buried in viscera. The laughter of light embroidered with black crepe, the vain sighs of wagons leaving. We are buried in viscera. On a road to the pens, we're stricken with black oranges and sugar. We are host to a symposium on money of a watermelon, values of lost mothers, daughters, or sons, the unfurling banners of hysterias, the loss that unfolds. And so we step up, smartly dance with the grace of nature's polish, fall prostrate in derision, pagan where the body's truth is stored. The public demands an image to pour oil into the barbarized ear, each bit immune, blameless, conserving the shared hierophany of each clevis, the pens bustling with the genetic familiarity of tears, salt wounds left unspoken. To establish with force and power to carry through the verity of thrones the ephemeral hour, we were looking back at distance, a lesson in impossibility. In the dawn I see the disenchanted fields where the night is closest, we will never be free. The rain flattens out and blurs night and morning as we walk through the canebrakes, lamenting the intersecting arc of the sun, the infinite darkness. I cannot imagine nor see the fences, the shattered animals, the distortion of fires almost green, which we mistook for the way back. The unknown knowns, upward falls, that holds no mysteries that pake where silence is thrown, humble on each step of the journey. It is the time of night when the women go missing and fear is savored as consent, the wish immodest peaks of sweat when what is seen cannot be imagined. The eye must never doubt the forms that seethe upon its surface, that penetrate it, that sever the threads of perception, where we see white swans, the capacity of hope for each pious victim, moments of loss, the unnamed assault, something seen cutting through movement, plunged deep in a forest of metaphors or symbols. At dawn they come back, like shadows that can never be touched, drunk with excess, every step extinguished, altars modeled by irreversible images and icons. But where loss remains, there is the God, both origin and end, this thing that is slave, the long thirst of the slain where blood hides and thickens. They know and imagine and answer yes, the petitions and legends leaves tips of resemblance in the rain. But what reigns is neither possession nor change, neither flesh nor repetition. I have a confession to make. When the outline hardens, I'm infatuated by ice and bone, the old look of new eyes, a sort of wordless waiting that is no more than a gift, a refusal, cries of pleasure on the blade of the moon, the mark deservedly black, indelible. As sunset opens among profiles postcard-like stark geometric, towards the event of which we are the moving stem, the rocks muffled by sound, the forest cloaked by presence, you give substance to the known unknowns. In search of the spinning axis, the massacres of involutional, illegible imagining. From you come crowns, universes with no imprint, thought, nor gesture to voice what for what. The simplest act is of one who sings, lips sewn shut by archaic loneliness of the pure deaf, soundless, unutterable, all where each is the guiding threads of permanence. I'm going to read now from my latest book. And again, I want to read two works, which are, one's dedicated to Andrew Crozier, and the other is very much in homage to Aimé Césaire. This one's called Veil Number 2. Imagine, it is a time and space of near night and you are out walking. The object of your thought Things forgotten now lost, feelings of shame and innocence, memories of a world no longer known, the mind overwhelmed by the sense of it. Crossing fields recently rinsed by rain, you give yourself time, but the shadows begin to fall, somewhat ominous, and the earth is no longer bound to the image of itself. It looks looted and ransacked, as if the real had been struck blind, woven out of rags and ashes. This is not so much a world as a journey. As you tramp along the outer edges of the field, looking into the implacable darkness, the losses and failings, the darker ones falling into the numbness of l'ensoir, hands outheld to the flames. If only you could step back and touch the things that scorch us by trailing lines of fire. But the time is night, the fields damp and muddy, the stubble wet and treacherous. As you edge through the rain in silence, you know that the evening is already burning away, as of moments each in turn diminish, shorn of reference, slowly fade from memory. And yet, the skies are light and radiant. Tramping out across the field, starlight is as dark as the first day, when, on the edges of objects, the verb carried without unveiling, the distant stand of trees, stark against any intimation of semblance, the limbs seemingly far off on the other side of the field, and yet your way transacted by their impotent withholding. Is this the mark that simultaneously allows you to brush lightly past and to measure out your own line of separation? You know that this detour is not mine since it claims you, yet you also know that these tracings reduce us both to sign objects, as le poursoir follows each thing into oblivion. Let us sign ourselves and stand and listen. The countryside is empty and of little promise. The mystery of the last arch is no more than what is meant by copula or projection, and what shines in the arc is nothing but our separation, the crossing point of completion and grounding, ever shifting between foundations and abysses, like two concentric circles distinguished only by slight and mysterious slippage. Let us assume the guardianship of what form determines in the sky's movements. I do not want you to feel like some astronomer looking at stars who suddenly sees a tear in the world and who pronounces in anguish that there is something missing, all the while knowing that light is not how being appears, and that the ruins of history, for want of a better term, have yet always been visible within the illusions of the subject. And yet, you walk out across the crest, the furrows courted without awe and without passivity. Looking back, you know that transients will not disappear from the horizon, nor will your eyes be caught out by some terminus, some reflection. The thing that veils is not someone else, but your own foreshortened shadow. The image I have in mind here is one of light falling in separation, farther from the threshold of authentic community, but beyond alienation. Imagine then, if you can, Orpheus beggared by the light of the implacable darkness, shaped by this broad surround until forced to confront his own insecurities and incipient resentments without dwelling or the possibility of what dwells. Everything muddy and dark, waiting to be ravaged or hauled away, else gutted, bled, surfaced in ash. The taste of it always in your mouth, streaked black in the rain, its bleakness held. This one's called the monster. The monster. So take her there, trembling, beside a never sink, beneath the swarm of midges, the single garter muddied, the voices, now naked, fatal with consequence. See her feelings darken as the veil lifts on the idol shielded from the worst atrocities. The red record, so blissfully intact as the torment lingers at the water's edge. The white no sooner touched than ready to go, again with disgust and desire, the body pressed to dreams of black. So little the separation, from red of sunset to the whiteness of the moon. The word ravish spells death as you run naked in the rain. 500 gather in the narrow arteries of Port Jervis, manning the roads far out to the countryside, stiff with patience till the sudden bursting of the skies rains down upon them, the monster in their midst, the last bloody act, taught to learn slowly each counsel of pain. The trees cover over the last remnants of pollution, the crowns green, the vented flesh of rings bleach red, as leaves streaked with the seeping, the way desire falls, or hatred is said to use every droplet to cover the traces of what was wrought over in grief on the boughs beneath. He has closed my heart, Lena said, his groans black even in the act of love. Then the storm broke, and they said this love was not love, the object of his forceful suit, not the woman laying down beside him, but all the stations of the morning, choked by the dark now manifest. To each neighbor the plea of innocence, and wounds to leaven an industry of blood. Clubfoot, murderer, wordless Caliban, hundreds swarm like lice over your body, taking strips of clothing, pieces of hair and of flesh, taking back from the wake what from flesh was never enough. By the light stare the godless, but by the flame we purify them. Each of us hungry to wear the dark skin of self-reliance and let the burden drop. And your last thought is the devotion of the swaying faces lit by the gleam of the match, and seeing them only lights them again. The stench that lingers, ash, the whiff of burning flesh. And to end with, on a lighter note, perhaps, my homage to blaxploitation. I don't know if any of you have seen Blackula, but it's a terrible movie. But this poem came out of watching that, and it's called "For Invisible Black Vampires." For invisible black vampires, unseen in the shining refuges of day, the stake of my nigger death, these spoke-bearing wraiths passing through shadows, through stairs, toward swamp water mists and virgin forests of fetishes and threats which move me, bury me, as you float toward me under miraculous suns in chains, unburied, undead, among black effusions and evil spells, among white images dining on catatonic nigger dolls, as we fade with the small hours, return with the dark night. Formidable friends, black hearts become great clefts of flesh when penetrated by your rich red blood. Because you are black, Umfakafi, black vampires fed on beasts on hope on our unshadowed skin, where vaults by undivine right, by immemorial natures embrace you. Know you are the horn and the bone, the locust and the drought. From you come storms and hunger and anemia of sense. In you, the invisible terror of your vanishing. Save us by feeding long and well. We have no magical poisons, and yet the cities stare at us, and the thing that really burns, that sucks out the last breath. There's not the unavoidable deadness going crazy and unloved, crazy because unloved, but the numerous pieties of violence, all white, all seeing, fatal and dark, even in death. You will learn again the simplest things last, of fauna and of herb, of the perfect whiteness bringing pain and death, if you remember how to receive them on the first rising, if you remember that each black image is itself a grave. Don't be frightened of fresh wounds, the babies or the brides. You know they will make dust of our lives. Be merciless on the high mountain paths above the villages and cornfields at the archway and threshold. Memorial as a bourne that binds us to the throat of freedom's past. For you inherit the shadow totems of insolent nihilismus, of the too much black leather beret and the too much black leather cape. By virtue of our old sufferings, of our old laments, by way of a solsticism in this beautiful black blood, you appear black vampire, and you are the most soulful of us all, with all these white, black deliria exploding around you, and seduce us in spite of ourselves, scavenging on shelters and badness and dope screens for the hood. Thank you very much.